Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. In this video, I am going to be walking you through the notes on how to structure a paragraph, as well as the assignment that goes along with it. These concepts are potentially a little bit confusing, especially if you have never been exposed to anything like it before. And I know that a lot of people value being able to hear an explanation of something as opposed to just reading it. So I'm going to this is essentially just be a lecture in which I will walk you through these concepts. So let's go ahead and download the document, How to Organize a Paragraph. All right, so the top instructions here, you will find two similar methods for writing, organizing a paragraph. These are not the only ways to organize a paragraph, and they won't work for every type of project, but for a research paper and for many other types of writing, they work really well. So I'm going to walk you through these two methods. The first method here, this is a method for integrating quotes and paraphrases. And you'll see that I have numbered the steps here, 1, 2, 3, 4. They are also color coded in various ways. And below, I have three examples here. And they are all, you'll see that each section is labeled with not only the number, but also the corresponding color. So it'll help you kind of break down these examples. The first thing that you're going to do when you are integrating or incorporating a quote or a paraphrase into a paper, you first want to have some sort of assertion. So you are saying something, you are claiming something about your topic or about the quote. A lot of times, this is going to take the form of your topic sentence. So most body paragraphs in a research paper, and many other types of writing as well, but we're focusing on research for the moment, are going to begin with what is called a topic sentence, which is a single sentence that lets the reader know what the main point or what the focus of that paragraph is going to be about. And that is a really good way to give your reader sort of a heads up. They know what they are going to encounter, they know what to expect, and that's going to help them better understand the information. Next, we have something called a lead in. Um, you could also call this a signal phrase. That's the term that I use a little bit more often, but some professors also call it a lead in. And what that is doing is that is providing some context for the quote. And the reason you need to do this is because you can't just what we call cherry pick a quote. So it's a little bit too easy sometimes to just take quotes from things and throw them into our writing, and sort of just hope that the quote speaks for itself. But that is very rarely the case. Oftentimes, quotes need to be set up, is usually how I describe it. You're kind of preparing your reader to receive that quote or that paraphrase. So oftentimes that is going to be mentioning the author's name. Sometimes it will also be mentioning the title of the source. And you usually want to provide some sort of context, some sort of explanation for what the reader is about to read. Because in most cases, whoever is reading your paper probably has not read the sources that you have. And even if they have, they may not be as familiar with it as you are, or they may not have thought about it in the same way that you did. So before just throwing in a quote, you have to kind of prepare your reader for what that quote is going to say. Once you have that full lead in, you are going to have the paraphrase or the quote itself, and then you're going to provide a citation. So let's walk ourselves through an example here. So first, we have our assertion or our topic sentence. The multitude of flavors in the packaging of vapors target teens. So we have a sentence here that is telling us what this paragraph is going to be about, and it's also making an assertion. It's claiming something. And that lets me know as a reader what I am about to encounter in this paragraph. Next, in blue here, we have our full lead-in. A 2017 study done by Harvard School of Medicine and published in the Journal of Pediatrics affirms these findings. So let's kind of break down what that is doing there. So it's telling us the year. It's telling us that it was a study and who the study was by. It was done by Harvard School of Medicine. And they also told us what it was published in. Now, they didn't mention the author's name, which is fine. You don't always need to do that. It kind of just depends on the circumstances. But they have successfully given us a lot of information here that's going to help us better understand the quote. Next, in red, we have the quote itself. Teens tend to prefer the candy flavors and cite that the vapor fluid smells like sugar, cotton candy, and Jolly Ranchers, flavors that clearly target non-adults. And then finally, we have our citation. So this is from Jones et al. Et al. Stands for and others. Notice that it is in parentheses, and we also have a period at the end of the sentence. And actually, I'm noticing a typo here. There shouldn't actually be this period there. That is an incorrect punctuation of et al. But anyways, let's continue on with our example. So after their quote and their citation, this writer flows right into another full lead-in. So they're about to present another piece of evidence. A February 2018 article in the New York Times surveyed teens who vape and corroborated these findings. They found 90% of the teens surveyed vaped candy or sweet-like flavors. The top seller was mango juice, followed closely by bubble gum. So our lead-in here gives us some information about the paraphrase, tell us when the article was published, where it was published, and they're also telling us a little bit of information. They're kind of giving us a heads up or a summary of what the paraphrase is going to be about. Then they include their paraphrase, and they provide a citation. And you have a couple of other examples here. I'm not going to go over those now because they are the same thing. They follow the same format. But this is one method for writing a paragraph, and specifically is a method for incorporating quotes and paraphrases into your writing. Next, we're going to talk about a method called MEAL. Now, this method is very, very similar to the previous one. In fact, it's so similar that I thought about only talking about one of these and not talking about both. But they kind of use different language. They are slightly different from each other. This first method is really a method of using quotes, whereas this method is used for writing full paragraphs. But they are very, very similar. So MEAL, what MEAL stands for, it's an acronym, stands for Main Idea, Example, Analysis, Link to Thesis. So let me walk you through what each of those things mean. Main idea, this is what your paragraph is going to be about. So this is basically the same thing as your topic sentence. You always want to let your readers know what your paragraph is going to be about. It helps them build the correct expectations for what you're going to say. Almost every paragraph should be making some sort of point, and you want to make this clear very early on. Now, this is kind of a side note, this does depend a little bit on your style and also on the genre that you are writing. Not every paper will use paragraphs that begin with a topic sentence. Sometimes you can put your topic sentence at the end of the sentence, but for the sake of kind of like keeping things very simple, very straightforward, this is the method that I most often teach. And I find that it works really well for research writing because it helps make things very clear to your readers. If you don't include your main idea in your first sentence of your paragraph, you're kind of at risk of your reader not really knowing what you're talking about and maybe getting lost. After your main idea, you're going to have an example. Now, this example needs to be something that is going to support your main idea. You can think of this as your proof or your evidence. And this is the part of the paragraph where you are likely going to want to include quotes and paraphrases. And remember to always introduce your evidence. So you'll probably notice here that this is very similar to the previous method. Both of these methods have a main idea essentially, um, and then they both recommend that you provide some context for your quote. Um, they're kind of just using different language to describe the same process. Yeah, so anyways, main idea, provide an example that helps support that main idea. That's usually going to be a quote or a paraphrase or something from your own personal experience. In writing project 3 for Comp 1, I am asking that you support yourself with some personal examples. And so that fits in well right here as well. It doesn't have to be a quote or a paraphrase. After your example, you're going to want to have an analysis. So your examples always need to be explained or analyzed. They do not explain themselves, and you should not trust your reader to do the interpretive work for you. Even if you think you are being obvious, make sure you explain what your example is supposed to show. So this is, I think I mentioned this earlier in this video, you don't really want to just throw information at your readers without fully explaining it. Pretty much everything that you say in your paper needs to have some sort of explanation that goes along with it. And any evidence that you present, just because we think of it as proof or as evidence, doesn't mean that your reader will see it that way or understand it in the same way that you will. So you will often have to explain yourself, or you'll have to analyze the evidence that you are presenting. One of my common tips for writers is that it can be helpful for you to pretend as if your reader isn't very smart. Now, that oftentimes isn't true. Very often, your reader will be someone who is very literate, very well educated, very intelligent. But the things that are clear in your head are not going to be as clear as you think they are to your reader. So sometimes you may feel like you're being too obvious, but it can go a long way for you to kind of like hold your reader's hand and really walk them through what you're saying. And that's what this analysis section does. And I have a little note here. The example and analysis portions of your paragraph, you can just keep repeating those. So you're going to begin your paragraph with a main idea, and then you're going to provide an example that supports that main idea. Then you're going to analyze or explain that example, and then you can just repeat that. You can provide another example and analyze it, provide another example and analyze it. So this doesn't mean that each paragraph needs to only have one example. This is just sort of a pattern for you to follow. And once you've done those 3 steps, you're going to end with a link to the thesis. And this kind of goes along with some of the things that I've already said. It helps if after you have made your point and you've provided examples and explained yourself, it helps to end a paragraph by making it very, very clear how everything that you just said relates back to your thesis. Oftentimes, if you don't pretty directly or pretty explicitly tell your reader how the point that you were making connects back to your overall idea, they may miss that. They may not really see how this one smaller point that you were making fits into the overall picture. So it's a very good idea to end your paragraphs with a sentence or two that helps connect those ideas back to your thesis. Let's go through an example. So here, I've provided the thesis because you need to know what the thesis is in order to kind of follow how the pattern works. So the thesis for this paper was, in a jury of her peers, Susan Glassbill uses neglected fabric items, specifically a dirty towel, some clothes, and an unfinished quilt to elicit empathy and insight from Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters, not only to help the women uncover Minnie's motive, but to emphasize the importance of emotional intelligence. So I know that's maybe a little bit long-winded. There's a lot going on in that thesis there, and you don't need to like really fully understand what it's saying. I just needed to mention that in order for this example to make sense. So, first we have our main idea. Mrs. Hale begins to develop an understanding of Minnie's marriage to Mr. Wright. The conversation about the towels focuses Mrs. Hale's attention on the rest of the unkempt kitchen. This pushes her to speculate about the quality of the Wrights' marriage and the happiness of their household. So again, that's a little bit wordy, a little bit long-winded, but that lets us know what this paragraph is going to be about. That's their main idea. Next, they provide us with an example that's going to back up their main idea. The writer says, and they're quoting, "It never seemed a very cheerful place." When the attorney again insists on criticizing Minnie as a housekeeper, Mrs. Hale rebuts, "Well, I don't think Mr. Wright had the homemaking instinct either," clarifying a moment later, "I don't think a place would be any the cheerfuller for John Wright's being in it." So that here is providing evidence to support this main idea. But the writer isn't letting these quotes stand on their own. They're going to analyze it for us. The writer says Mrs. Hale recognizes the difficulties that many must have faced and begins to understand that the Wrights were in a conflicted marriage. So they have their main idea, they present some evidence, or an example, I should say. They explain and analyze that example, and now they're going to end the paragraph by linking back to the thesis. It is this insight, stemming from Mrs. Hale's ability to understand Minnie's emotional well being, that later causes Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters to discover why Minnie killed her husband. So let's take a look at how that is linking back to the thesis. So some important things here. In the thesis, they mention fabric items. They mention empathy. So being able to understand someone else's life and their experience. And they also mention uncovering why this woman Minnie killed her husband, and also emotional intelligence. They mention the importance of emotional intelligence. So then if we go and look at the end of this paragraph, we'll notice that the writer here is repeating some of those things. And by repeating those things is making it clear to the reader that they are connecting these ideas back to their thesis. So here they mention insight, they mention emotional well-being, and they mention why Minnie killed her husband. So those are three ideas that we saw in the thesis, and by repeating those ideas at the end of this paragraph, the writer is letting us know how the main idea and how the example in this paragraph, how they are working to support the overall idea. And I have another example or two here for you. These are a little bit long though, so I'm not going to take the time to read through these, but they work in the same way. Now that I've walked you through those notes, let's go ahead and take a look at the actual assignment. All right. So in this assignment, you'll be using the notes that we just walked through to write a paragraph with two properly integrated quotes. So in other words, you're just writing a paragraph. You're following those formulae that we just went over, and you are incorporating a couple of quotations. Now you'll see the instructions here say that the paragraph can be about anything you like. Doesn't matter what it's about. Totally up to you. And you can select your quotes from any source. Anything at all. Maybe something we've read in class. Something that you've read as a part of your own research. Doesn't matter. You just need to have a couple of quotes that you're going to incorporate in this paragraph. Now, the instructions here, you'll see that, so there's a lot going on here. 8 steps is kind of a lot. But basically, this is just asking you to do everything that I just walked you through in those notes. So let's take a look here. So first, when you write your paragraph, and you're going to write your paragraph in this space down here, you want to begin with a topic sentence that identifies the main point or the main idea of the paragraph. So both of the formulae that we talked about mention that. You have to assert something, you have to have a main idea. Then you need to have you're going to include a quote, but you first have to set up that quote. Or in other words, you need a signal phrase, you need to provide some context for that quote. And I have a reminder here. To set up the quote, you need to give the reader an idea of what the quote is going to be about, where the information is coming from. Use a signal phrase. Once you've done that step, you're just going to put in one of the quotes that you have selected. And you need to make sure that you're punctuating it correctly according to MLA format. Now, last week we did several activities about MLA, so I'm hoping that you are starting to have a bit of a firmer grasp on MLA format. After your quote, you're going to provide at least one sentence in which you indicate the significance of the quote or your interpretation of it. So this is the analysis step. We had our main idea. These two steps, steps 2 and 3, these are the example part of meal. Now you're going to analyze your quote. And if you a good way to approach this as well, if you feel like you maybe struggle with analyzing things, what you can do is just essentially put the quote in your own words. So after you quote something, if you just put it in your own words, sometimes that can be an effective way of sort of explaining the quote. Now, it doesn't work all of the time, but if you kind of struggle to explain or analyze quotes, first just try putting it into your own words. After your quote, or sorry, after your interpretation of your quote, you are going to set up your next quote. And that's probably going to also take the form of a transition. So you just presented one quote and you explained the quote. Now you're going to transition your reader into your next quote. And you're going to provide another signal phrase. And a lot of times that transition doesn't need to be anything fancy, doesn't need to be really long. You're just kind of letting your reader know that you are about to move into another piece of evidence. Step 6, you're going to provide your next quote, making sure that you punctuate it and format it properly. Step 7, you are then going to analyze or explain that quote. And then finally, step 8, you're going to wrap up your paragraph. You're going to give it a sense of closure. And you should write 1 to 2 sentences in which you A, restate your main idea, B, discuss how your quotes are related to each other, so how the two quotes that you just used, how they are connected, and or, so you don't have to do all 3 of these things. These are kind of options. You can discuss the overall significance of your paragraph. So this kind of lines up with that idea of linking back to your thesis. And you'll see here, like I just said, you don't necessarily need to do all 3. So this is just a nice breakdown of how you can write paragraphs. Again, I understand that this may feel like a lot, but just take it one step at a time. I think the steps are fairly straightforward, and hopefully me explaining the formulae are going to help you out. And you'll follow these steps and write your paragraph below. If you watch this video and still have some questions or are confused, email me and I'll do my best to try to explain it in another way for you.